Thank you for listening to the Open Discourse Podcast. I'm Charles Mitchell, co-founder and CEO of the Open Discourse Coalition. In this series, I interview thought leaders, elected officials, entrepreneurs, and other change agents. Today, I'm joined by Haejin and Mako Fujimura, co-authors of the new book, Beauty and Justice. Mako and Haejin, it's been a joy to work with you on many different ventures on the campus of Bucknell University, two of our alma mater and a frequent destination for the other one of us. Delighted to be able to have a conversation today that anybody anywhere can see. Hope that we'll talk about some Bucknell memories, but want to start with your new book, which you co-authored together, Beauty and Justice. You say in that book that Christians are like wedding planners. Why is that?
Yeah, I've been saying that quite a bit. I wrote a book called Art and Faith, Theology of Making, in which I built on that case. People have many ways of describing what the Christians call the gospel, good news, and what the Bible is teaching primarily for us through Jesus. Jesus started out creating a miracle of turning water into wine at wedding at Cana. And he kept on talking about weddings to his disciples and puzzled them quite a bit. What was he talking about? Is he talking about his own wedding? And it seems to be that, even though he's a rabbi who chose to be celibate and single. So that didn't make sense. And as they looked back on Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, they came to this realization that he was indeed talking about a cosmic wedding to come. And so I always think that a wedding is a place where all the arts are represented. You have cuisine to fashion to design to dance to music to sometimes even preaching, right? So these are all art forms that we can learn to excel in. And I think given that Jesus is talking about the cosmic wedding to come, where he calls us his bride, and he's the bridegroom, and we are to prepare for this cosmic wedding to come. So that would mean that when heaven comes to earth and we get to experience fully what Jesus is talking about, he will be our bridegroom. And we want to be prepared for this. For me as an artist, it is my absolute ambition to be on the list of artists to present or maybe offer my work at this wedding. So that new creation portal that I'm creating every day in my studio can be seen as something that truly honored the bridegroom and will usher in some way this new creation. And we wrote a book, Beauty and Justice, knowing that both beauty and justice will also prepare us for the new creation to come as well.
I think the cosmic wedding is the culmination of beauty and justice. Yeah. We will see both present at that wedding in the most glorified forms. But I think when we talk about Christians being wedding planners, we are also talking about God's call for us to co-create with Jesus, with Holy Spirit on this side of eternity towards that new creation to come. So we're not just brides just waiting for the bridegroom without doing anything. We're not just simply passively waiting. We're actually planning that wedding together on this side of eternity, not just for ourselves, for this creation. Mm-hmm. So I think that idea of not just the bride, but being wedding planner, an active participation of the God's redemption of this world, I think that really excites me.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful image at so many levels, guys. Yeah. I can't wait to share this interview with my eldest daughter, who you met at Bucknell a little bit ago, because she wants to be a wedding planner. And I want her to hear that answer and wrap her head around it.
Yeah.
I also can't help thinking, though, I mean, Haejin, you were a bride a few years ago, Mako's bride. And,
That's right.
And when I heard your part of that answer, I mean, I love having a conversation like this where you have both members of a couple. You clearly see things the same way. You wrote a book together, but you each see a different facet. You know, Mako, as far as I know, has never been a bride, but you have. And when you describe the kind of bride or wedding planner that you think one should be, well, I know from reading your book that you were that kind of bride, because at the time that you became Mako's bride, you had already created a law firm and done all sorts of things. One of the things you write about in your book, I mean, you both write about it with pride, is the values of your law firm. And to me, those spoke a lot, Haejin, about who you are, what you stand for, and how you want to advance beauty and justice. Would you share some with our listeners about those law firm values?
Yeah, absolutely. You can also go to our website, shimassociates.com, and then see the list of values that starts with, we value everyone's design. We love our neighbors, and it's not about me, and means matter. And so those values are prominently written and displayed in our lobby. The reason why we decided to do that is because we wanted to show to the public how we practice law, how we run our company. Many times we talk about what we do, and it could be pretty simply presented, whether it's through your, website or your, presentation of your company. What you practice, what you produce, what you provide as a service. Many times we don't know why a company does certain things, right? The motivation behind it. But even more so, we don't know how they practice their business. So even as a law firm, I wanted the public to know, I wanted my clients especially to know, I wanted my team to have the same understanding of how we practice our legal practice. And that kind of bleeds into all the things that we do together in that space. But for example, means matter, right? We talk about how we process certain problems to solution. But the way we get there is kind of hidden, right? My client doesn't really know how we get to one place to another, from problem to solution, from a question to a strategy, but how we get there with integrity, with honesty, with transparency, with innovation. Those things matter. So to be able to share with my team and beyond how we do what we do, therefore we have a deeper understanding of why we do it, I think is really important. Every company can have a different value, but those values can be just the characteristics. But if you can disclose to the world with confidence and with the integrity and hold yourself accountable, how you do what you do, I think it's really special.
It is really special, and that comes through loud and clear in the book. One follow-up question about that, Haejin. Could you tell our listeners what your law firm does every day at 11 o'clock in the morning?
11:30.
Yeah, so 11:30.
Oh, pardon me. Okay, 11:30.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So first of all, we call our office estuary. So estuary is ecological system where we have this water and salt water, fresh water and the salt water meet and create this abundance. And so a lot of living organisms live there with a healthy competition, and they create this natural abundance. So in our office, we have my law firm and my nonprofit that I had the privilege of co-founding, Embers International, Mako's Gallery, Mako's nonprofit endeavor. We have Academy Kintsugi in there. So I get to incubate all of these different artistic, cultural, legal, business endeavors. So at 11:30 every morning, because we believe in Jesus Christ and how our call to store everything that is given to us in this side of eternity is not by our own strength, but it's by God's strength. we need to really channel that into everything that we do. So at 11:30, which I think is kind of prime time of your morning, because you start your day like anywhere between 8:30, 9:30. And then you have lunchtime, maybe 12:30. And 11:30 is that moment that you feel like you are accomplishing something. And you want to finish this and finish strong and go to lunch, right? And then start your afternoon. And that's when we stop everything. Because it's an act of surrender to the Almighty God who gives us the strength, who gives us the calling, who gives us actually how we do what we do and why we do it. So we stop everything, we gather our team, and this is a collective team of different endeavors. And it's by invitation. You're not forced to do it, but it's by invitation. And we come and for half an hour, we pray together. We share our concerns, and at every day of the week, we actually take a turn to lead that time so that different spiritual practice of Christianity can be presented. So one day we may do Lectio Divina. Another day we may do a praise song. And another day we may do a silence and listening. But with all of that, we pray together, not only for ourselves, but also for those people who are suffering in the world, and surrender. Yeah, that's what we do at 11:30 every day.
It's beautiful. Beautiful. I wanted to take a minute to ask you both about some influential figures who are in your book. Some of whom have been the subject of some of your work at Bucknell. We'll come in a minute, if it's okay with you, to part of your wedding. There's an appendix, as you know, to your book, which is the charge that you were given at your wedding. And I want to give you guys the chance to talk about that a little bit. But to go back in time a little bit, and I know the person who gave that charge is a very influential pastor in your lives. But Mako, there was also another very influential pastor in your life who was the subject of an event that you moderated at Bucknell.
Yes.
Some of our listeners may have heard about that event, but could not have been there.
Yeah.
I just find so many of our fellow Bucknellians have never heard of Tim Keller, class of 1972. Could you share a bit about his impact on your life, of course, but also on New York and the world for those who may never have heard of him?
Absolutely. Tim Keller is one of, I think history will look back on this time and we'll see him as one of the giants of spiritual unction to as far as preaching, art of preaching. I think he's one of the great masters of 20th century, if I could even claim that, along with so many great preachers of our time. But his life is very unique. He grew up in Pennsylvania. He went to Bucknell, became a Christian at Bucknell, and soon after he went to seminary, and he never really expected to end up where he ended up, which is leading this major international global movement of churches called Redeemer Church Network. And it really began with him teaching the art of preaching at one of the seminaries, and a few of his mentors really challenged him to, if you're going to talk about preaching, you better do it yourself. And so be part of church planting. He was always interested in this, but he never really had the opportunity to explore it. Started out with this very small church I believe in North Carolina. And then when this network of churches thought about planting a church in New York City, this is in late 80s, which means that you're walking into a city which had a reputation of being called a graveyard for pastors. Many churches were closing. Many pastors have left New York City at that time. When I got to New York City in early 90s, I can still remember my friends saying, there are only a handful of churches that really preaches the gospel. And Redeemer is one of them, but it's new, so it's very small. When I went, the first service was about 150 people with 2 services, so that's probably about 300 people. But and I heard Tim preach for the first time, and I didn't know that he was a Bucknellian. But I came away thinking, my goodness, that was just like a Bucknell Humanities lecture, except it was about the Bible. Very inspiring, compelling, persuasive. And I went up to him and, shook his hand and said, I went to the school called Bucknell. And he said, oh, I did too. So our friendship grew over time. I became involved as a leader in this movement. And before you knew it, by after 9/11 especially, the church exploded into what became essentially a 5,000 people church in the middle of New York, which is just such an impossible story when you think about it. And then a global movement of churches called City to City, which I'm still involved. I spoke at a church in Southeast Asia just the other day as a daughter church of many, many churches that were planted. So, and we're going to a church in Taiwan next to speak there. So there's so much influence that Tim left behind. And so you can listen to his sermons. If there's a podcast of Redeemer Church, if you look up Tim Keller, it will come up. And we have been listening to his sermons over and over now after his passing, that I still see something fresh every time. There's something about his preaching that is so deep, and his enormous effort to reach into history and culture, as well as biblical exegesis or understanding of the Bible. It is just so rich that it's a gold mine of resources that I think we are just beginning to tap into. And by the way, both of us went to Redeemer. We never met in that time, but both of us went to Redeemer. The pastor who married us also was part of Redeemer movement, so that there's a lot of connections here.
Well, you anticipated my question, Mako. Haejin, I was going to ask you when Keller entered your life. Was it when you showed up at Redeemer, or was it before that?
Oh, so I actually went to Redeemer Church as a college student in the 90s, early 90s. So it was a beginning of Redeemer movement.
Wow.
I didn't know Mako then, but I just, I remember feeling so compelled by his preaching, but I wasn't really involved in the church community just yet because, college life is so busy. Mm-hmm. And then when I went back to Redeemer, I think in 2011, that's when I got really involved with their Center for Faith and Work. Mm-hmm. So I was part of the fellowship there, was discipled at Redeemer, and began to teach, actually, the integration of faith and work in different professional settings. And so that has been just an incredible part of my life where Tim's preaching and his teaching has really formed my spiritual journey, especially as someone who's in the marketplace and growing as a professional, as a young person back then. And then I think, decades later, his legacy continues, and he will be remembered as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, the preacher of our time.
Well stated. We'll come in a minute to that other pastor you mentioned, because that's another great story that I'd love for our listeners to hear. Yeah. I can't help just echoing back what you guys are saying in terms of the impact that he made and his legacy. I've felt that personally. As a Bucknellian, Mako Haejin, as somebody who's traveled to Bucknell many times, the experience of driving there. I usually... I grew up in Philadelphia. Now I live in the Harrisburg area, but it doesn't matter. You drive up next to the Susquehanna River. You have the river on your right. And I will never forget driving up next to the river one day a few years ago and listening to his sermon on the priority of marriage, which just came up randomly, providentially in my YouTube feed. I wasn't planning on listening to that particular message. And he spoke about the priority of marriage, how next to one's relationship with God, there should be no higher priority in life. And at the time, I was running a large national organization and traveling all the time. And I was so penetrated and convicted by what Tim had to say. And I mean, I say his name because he's my brother. I didn't know him like you did. I wish I did, but I was too late. But I was so penetrated by what he had to say that I quit my job. And that's why I'm here. Wow. That's why I'm running the Open Discourse Coalition today instead of what I was doing then. So that's a profound impact on my life. Also, Mako, as you know, you moderated an event on his legacy at Bucknell a few years ago, an ODC event. It was a wonderful day. And maybe you two have some memories of that you'd like to share. I would like you to know and our listeners to know that event, in fact, has a legacy. And Haejin, it relates to what you said. Because he was such a pioneer in terms of talking about the integration of faith and work, we at the ODC have started a series now on that theme. One event per semester, where, and it was student driven. After that event, students said, we want more, we want some of this.
Wow.
So people come to campus, there's one later this month, and they talk about how they handle being a person of faith, having a family, and having a business. Because students voiced, there's no place for us to have that conversation. We said, let's have that conversation. I share that with you because I also view that as part of his legacy. Very few people, I think this is part of what you were saying, Haejin, very few people in church leadership, first of all, broach those issues in the first place. And second of all, can broach them in a way that's helpful. He did, and we're trying to carry that forward now at Bucknell. So I said, you guys might have some memories of that day that I just referenced, and you both nodded. I'd love for you to share those, and then we'll move on to the Keller protege who is in your book.
Yes. Do you want to go first? So that was a very special day. I remember thinking, I tried so many times to bring Tim to Bucknell, and twice he agreed to do it. And last minute, something will always happen. If you run a large church in New York City, you can imagine. And at the time, he was running a global movement. So he just prioritized pastors and living a life that he was preaching. This is one thing that I can tell you as a friend and as someone who followed them daily, almost, and as a part of a community. This was a pastor who really lived what he preached, and he, as you can imagine, you come under a lot of attacks in planting a church in New York City. The people who don't understand faith will attack you, including journalists and so forth, media, and then other brothers and sisters will attack you because either, they find something different about how he approached the city. For him, city was a treasure It's a portal into finding city of God, and understanding the distinction between the city of man and city of God. So we are to move into the city really physically. That's why I moved my family into the city, and then lived and love your neighbor. In my case, many artists in downtown. And so that day when I was reflecting on that as we were, and I didn't know what to expect, it was packed, and not many people knew him personally as we did on stage, but I hope we did a decent job introducing him to, and the legacy that you speak of is exactly the kind of legacy, Tim, wherever I go, when I talk about Tim or when I hear his influence, that's the fruit is continue to generate new ways of integration, especially faith and work, as we have been talking about, but also in other areas. Faith and education is another area he was very passionate about, and I carry that with me as a board member. Even though at Bucknell, as we know, it's more of a spectrum and kind of a prism that we're developing. So it was a very special day for me.
When I first met Mako, I thought he actually was a Bucknell staff. He could not stop talking about Bucknell. And he was trying to recruit me to give consultation to I don't know how to develop international students, for Bucknell. And I really thought he had two jobs, being an artist and Bucknell staff. And because love is contagious, right? So I got to love Bucknell University because of Mako. But then that day, I did not expect the room to be so packed. I was really surprised, actually. I thought it was just one of those lunch event.
Yeah.
A few people will be there. Yeah. And so I was surprised because of that. And then it was broadcasting, and a lot of interests were there. And two, I was surprised also that how little was known about Tim Keller. And so what an opportunity to introduce such a giant of our time. And Mako got to do that. So I was really proud of him. I think what really surprised me again is after that event, I know for a fact there was one attendee, at least one, but I'm sure there are more that we don't know. But this one attendee who's a friend of ours, who's not a Christian, but such a beautiful person, was genuinely impacted by that conversation that he began to listen to Tim Keller's sermon every single day. Yeah. And he will talk about how the meaning of grace is presented to him through Tim's voice. And I think because when you grow up in a Christian home or church and community, you think the word grace or the meaning of it is something that we all kind of understand, but it is such a foreign concept in the world. So for our friend to start talking about grace, and he said, if this is true, if what Tim Keller claims to be is true, that changes everything.
Which is exactly what Tim said.
Exactly. So he gets it, right? Yeah. So and so this is the fruit of that event that was surprising and also really we'll feel very grateful for. And I think, what we call what is true, good, and beautiful. When true, good, and beautiful thing is created, it has a power to be generative. Which is what we talk about in our book, Beauty and Justice, as well, that it has the power to create something more and something beyond, right, what was created. So I think that event continues to create, right, through your student body, through our friends, and through, I think, a lot more that we don't even know about. So I think those are the moments that we know that Holy Spirit was there. And we are able to witness it.
Thank you guys so much for sharing those memories. Since 2020, the ODC has sponsored more events than I can count, but there is nothing that I am prouder of personally than that day. And you're right, Haejin. Mako did a great job, and so did the other panelists. Now, let's get back to that book you were talking about. You talked there about another pastor who influenced you and something that was so influential that you include it in its entirety in the book. Yes. Can you share a little bit about that with our listeners?
Yeah, so David H. Kim, who's a pastor here in Princeton and is a friend that I've journeyed with for a long time in Redeemer in New York City. He actually began the Gotham Fellowship, which is the first faith and work integration group, which Haejin was one of the leaders. Again, I wasn't directly involved, so I didn't get to meet Haejin before God's time, but David played a critical role in even us meeting in 2020. And we have been journeying together, and we have been going through challenges, both of us praying for each other, and knew heart to heart what was going on. We were able to get very transparent, and that's a real blessing, as you know, if you have any friends like that you can spend time with along the way, being able to share your vulnerabilities and your prayers and so forth. David is one of those people, and happens to be a neighbor, and share similar backgrounds, and so he was kind of the mediator to connect us, but also a counselor throughout dating, and we asked him to marry us, and we did not plan his wedding message being on Isaiah 61. That was a surprise for both of us when we were at the church. This was during COVID, so only 10 people in the church and a lot of people on Zoom. But when he spoke on Isaiah 61, we looked at each other and said, that's incredible, because those are Isaiah 61 is a central Bible passage that we have carried individually for a long time, for Haejin's call into justice, my call into beauty. And here's David speaking about it, but in a flip way to say that Haejin as an artist and me as a justice advocate. And so there was a beautiful message that we have actually incorporated Isaiah 61 throughout the book. It's kind of a backbone, sometimes invisible, sometimes visible, but we had to put his message in there because it is absolutely the central messaging that we have based our marriage upon.
And I'm really impressed that you actually read all the way through, because that is actually appendix. A lot of people don't read appendix. So kudos to you.
Yeah.
Well, I do find you both fascinating. That's part of why I'm here. Also, I think that the book of Isaiah is an underappreciated treasure. So you offer me something on Isaiah, I'm probably going to read it. And also, you offer me I think of it as like a spiritual son, or grandson of Tim Keller, who I've never had the chance to hear or read before. Well, I'm going to read that too,
Yes.
I mean, my wife and I are such, I don't know what you would call it, nerds or devotees or whatever.
Yeah.
We never had the chance to go to Redeemer at the time that you did. But when we were in New York for an event, recently, we're like, well, his son is preaching. Yes. Let's go hear him. Anyway, for all those, you're nice to say that, Haejin, but I wouldn't have missed it. Let me put it that way. Now, another theme in your book that I wanted to talk about is you say that, especially in the context of Embers International, which you mentioned earlier, Haejin, you spoke about it at Bucknell at another ODC event. I want to speak to that here. You talk about how you guys pray for perpetrators to become protectors. So two things I hope you'll illuminate a little bit, enough so that more people will read your whole book. One, what you do at Embers as it relates to perpetrators. That in and of itself is really important. You spoke about that at Bucknell, Haejin. But what I think is even more beautiful about what you wrote is it's one thing to say, hey, perpetrators are perpetrators, we need to stop them. That's true, by the way. We do need to do that, okay? And I know you Absolutely. Believe that, but it takes it a whole nother step further, and it's, I think you would both say, a gospel step to say not only should we stop perpetrators from hurting girls in India, for example, as I know you're doing, but we should pray for them to be transformed from the inside out, so that they actually become protectors. So I would love for you to shed light on both of those things, Haejin, not just the work that you do to protect, but that next level that you aspire to in your book.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So Embers International is a global organization that pursue intergenerational freedom. And this is what I mean by that. So human trafficking has been now, I think, a more known, this problem that we've had historically in humanity. But what we don't know is the severity of it. So today we have more people enslaved than any part of human history before. So we have a 50 million people who are enslaved, and that is probably a conservative number. So 50 million, to put it into a context, the entire population of Canada is about 30 million. So we have that many people who are still enslaved. And there are different forms of slavery that happens in modern history. And one of them is sex trafficking. And it takes also different forms in different communities. But where we have been called to serve in India, we serve those people who have actually been left behind from being rescued. So when girls are trafficked at a young age, they are deceived or forced into trafficking and sold into brothels. And there are great organizations who do rescue work in collaboration with the local law enforcement. And I am so grateful for that. And I've been journeying with them also for more than a couple decades. But not everybody gets to be rescued. So the girls who have not been rescued, they will grow up actually in this really violent situation without any recourse. And then what happens to them is that as they grow up to be teenagers, they become mothers in the brothel. And they give birth to a child who becomes second or third generation trafficking victim. So this a crime gets inherited by the next generation. And this is kind of a darkness that we don't really talk about, because it's really hard for us to think about a family being born in the darkest place in the world. So what do we do about them? It's impossible to rescue entire family because there's no social fabric, structure, shelter system, a restoration a process and program that is available for the whole family. So when a whole family is rescued, it really has to be a community who's around them, who can surround them and plug them into a healthy society that actually can provide also healing, restoration, education, and empowerment. What happens to a trafficking victim is that it's not just their physical body or their emotional or psychological health has been damaged and violated. With that, their identity, their agency, their ability to make decisions for their life has been also destroyed. So any restoration process and program has to accompany them, not only providing for their needs, but also journeying with them so that their identity can be renewed, their agency can be empowered. So what Embers International is doing is, in this particular red light district community, the families who have been still trapped in this intergenerational cycle of exploitation, we journey with them from rescue all the way to reintegration into a healthy society. And then through that journey, we provide education, counseling, healing, and things that really is required for someone to become wholly human again. So this work, I mean, we can simply put it into trafficking work, but it's much deeper than that because it's actually about formation. It's about spiritual formation and healing, the work of redemption. So when we do a work of redemption, I think unless we can see the whole community, which is the red light district, in need of God's redemption, it's easy for us to miss the equation that is in play when the darkness and evil is at work. So we can take people out of a dangerous situation and put them in a safety. But unless there is a systematic change, heart change, and formational change in the entire community, there's going to be another victim that's going to replace the people who are being rescued. So we have people who are abusing vulnerable people group, and they are the perpetrators. They are traffickers, they are madams, and they are the brothel owners. So when we look at them, if you look at them as just people who are committing crime and therefore they deserve punishment, which is true because they need to be stopped, and the crime and the criminal activity has to be restrained. It has to be stopped. But also they are also in need of redemption because they're also bondage to the slavery of sin. And it's kind of impossible task, right? If you think about it. But we do pray for them, not against them. We pray against the evil and sin and brokenness of this world. We pray against the trafficking and the darkness that is lurking over our families that we serve. But we do pray for the people who are also enslaved to sin and crime so that their hearts will change and then they will become a protector of the vulnerable people. Many times what happens to those who are committing the sin, they also are in generational bondage. Their children also become criminals and their grandchildren become traffickers. So if we can be playing a role in their redemption as well, and God will have to shine the light. But one thing we can definitely do right now today is pray that they will become a people of light.
Yeah. And we serve 120 children, 80 families, and we work with them step by step. And these 120 children, we send them to private schools so that they are able to experience the best of education. And we have high ambition for them. And we have seen a few students, we call them legacy students, but there are nurses. One is an aeronautic mechanic right now, but wants to be a pilot.
We do have a lawyer.
We do have a lawyer.
Electricians. Yeah.
So we've seen amazing effect on these young lives in the past 5 years, even that part that I have been part of.
Marvelous. Mako and Haejin, there's so much more in your book that I want to ask you about. I think I'm going to refer our listeners to their own opportunity to ask you about it. You're speaking after the next Bucknell trustee meeting, in which, of course, you'll participate, Mako, on May 1st in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, co-sponsored by the Open Discourse Coalition at the Row House in Lancaster. So if folks have heard what you've said so far about your book and they want to know more, first, they should buy it. Second of all, they should bring it to that event, and hopefully you'll sign it like you've signed some books for me, and they can ask you more questions. I would love to ask more, but I want to respect your time. Certainly, a book I recommend to our listeners is your new book. I also always love to ask guests on this program, other than the obvious, the one I just recommended, a great book that you would recommend to our listeners. What would that be for you?
Well, I always carry around a book of poems by T.S. Eliot called Four Quartets. And this is a very small book, but it's profoundly important for me. After 9/11, this is the go-to place where I found a human voice speaking into my trauma. And so that became a journey of healing for me, to listen to this poet who was also traumatized by being an air warden in the London Blitz, and but later on writing this poem, and it has become a way for him to find healing
Yeah, this is a classic. But I think if you're a Christian or if you're curious about Christianity, C.S. Lewis' Mere Christianity should be your textbook. There are so many other books that I can recommend.
Tim's favorite
Yeah,
book.
yeah, Mere Christianity. But if you, any of the listeners, are interested in justice work or being a lawyer, do read Gary Haugen's Good News About Injustice. And this title itself should make you pause. What is good news about injustice? So I highly recommend that.
Okay, excellent. We're creating a library of those recommendations. I look forward to putting your choices in them so that students can take them. We give them to students for free, alongside a lot of Keller books, in case you're wondering.
Awesome.
Next traditional question: who's your favorite world historical figure?
Well, there's so many. I have been thinking a lot about Abraham Lincoln of late because of what's going on in this country and in the world, and kind of leadership that he had to provide in a time when America was literally fractured. So that would be, a name that pops up in my mind.
Yeah. Well, William Wilberforce, of course. Everybody should know about not only him, but how he did what he did. And it's really remarkable thing. So, I can give you a list, but I'll stop there.
Just a quick follow-up on that, Haejin. I just like a lot of people don't know who Tim Keller is. I bet you a lot of our listeners, unfortunately, don't know who William Wilberforce is. Now, yes. I get the joke. I understand how that ties to your work, but can you give our listeners 30 seconds if they've never heard of that man? Who is he?
Yeah, he's a British politician and abolitionist. Was the major force to stop slavery in Britain. But he did it not just on his own. He did it with friends. So.
Yep. And I love that one of his friends, anybody who's ever been to a funeral has heard the hymn Amazing Grace. Of course, one of his friends was John Newton, the author of Amazing Grace. So hopefully that gives people enough to get curious about Wilberforce. What's an example for you guys of some really influential advice that you once received?
Yeah.
Well, for me, I remember back at Bucknell, I had my advisor. I was a double major with a minor, so I had several advisors, but one was this legendary professor, Douglas Scanlon. And as his student, one of the great memories I have of him was whenever I tried to do things and overextend myself, because you're trying all these things and learning all these disciplines, he would encourage me to see that failure as success. This is a moment you understand what it is that your heart is telling you is important, and don't look at the results, but press into it and keep going, basically. And after I graduated from Bucknell with double major and a minor, he sat me down. He said, I am so proud of you for doing that, pressing into it, never giving up. And I still remember that encouragement from him.
Beautiful.
So the founder of International Justice Mission, another great anti-trafficking organization, Gary Haugen, is a mentor of mine, and he also so graciously endorsed our book. So we're really excited about that. When I decided to start my own law firm, and I've been practicing for now over 20 years, and this is about, 14, 15 years ago, and I went to him and I wanted his advice. And so I said, Gary, I'm going to start my own law firm. And you started your own, practically a law firm, International Justice Mission. So do you have any advice for me? And he gave me 2 pointers. And he has always given me 2 pointers. And Tim Keller always preaches on 3 points, right? So he said, 1, follow your heart. And I think when you receive an advice that from someone that you not only admire but understands you, like you understand what they're saying without them having to explain so much. So I just knew that what he meant was you have Jesus in you. So follow the Jesus in your heart. And I think a lot of times young people, and especially when you're in college or in your 20s, and I've been there too, you feel directionless, right? And so you ask a lot of advice about where to go, what to do. But I think it's more important for you to know what your heart tells you. Many times you don't know that. That's why you feel so kind of aimless. But listening to Jesus in you and how Holy Spirit guides you and what your heart's desire is. So listen to your heart. That was number 1. Follow it. And then 2 is do it with friends. Mm-hmm. Because it's so much more fun to do with friends, but also it's so much more powerful. Mm-hmm. And so 1, do you have those friends that you can do things with? And 2, if you do it together. And I think that this is a really lonely world, whether you are in your personal life marketplace. And so I think Bucknell University or any college setting is a place where you have those friendships and you build it, you invest in it, you cultivate it, right? And then do things with your friends, whether it's your professional endeavor or otherwise. So I'll say that also to the listeners as well.
I was wondering if that was going to be your answer, Haejin, because as you know, that's in your book as well.
Yeah.
Clearly, it was very influential advice that you followed. Well, the last question I wanted to ask you both is simply this. You've been very generous with your time on multiple occasions, this interview, multiple events, to Open Discourse. Clearly, you believe that this work is important. Why is it important to you?
Yeah, Open Discourse is one of the places, I think, where students and alum and all of us can come with open questions. I think we live in a time when these questions have weight, and they can be weight of certainty, and tends to create schisms, culture war kind of rhetoric, which I argue in my culture care book that nobody wins. That you win by losing territory. So you eventually end up with very little. So the alternative to that is to see culture as an ecosystem to tend to, and that's what I call culture care. And so open discourse groups like this allow culture care to happen in a very complex terrain of the academia, but also culture at large.
I think people all desire to be known, right? And to have different voices and be accepted, even though like your thoughts and ideas might be different from people around you. And you feel scared to speak up many times because you don't know whether you're going to be accepted, right? So I think open discourse is so important because that is your mission and vision, that you let the public know, right? This is who we are. We are going to create a safe place for open discussion, right? You can come with different ideas, disagreements, questions, and then we can always refer back to the mission and vision and feel like, okay, this is going to be a safe place because that's what you stand for. So I think, we can gather and then we can start talking about different things but then there's no commitment for that safety, right? You don't know that. So, but then open discourse provides that commitment. So I think that's really important for our students and people who are part of it. This a very important psychologist, John Bowlby, said this: life is a series of daring adventures from a secure base. So the reason why we can do daring adventures and sometimes we fail, sometimes we succeed, right? Sometimes we see fruit and sometimes not, is because we have a secure base, whether that's your home, your family, your community, places like open discourse. I think that's why when you have a victim of violence, their safe base has been taken away. Therefore, they have no a place where they can start new life. So I think open discourse will exemplify what we all desire, that safe place where we can do the daring adventures of different dialogue.
I love that you said people can come with their questions, Haejin, because one, you're right, of course, and two, I think that's also in the tradition of the guy we've been talking about, the great Bucknell and Tim Keller, who always invited, as you know, questions after a sermon, right?
Yeah.
Those are just beautiful, beautiful reflections. It's been a delight to have this conversation with you both. Most grateful that you would take the time, and I trust it will not be the last. I know we'll have that time together on May 1st. I do encourage our listeners to dig more deeply into the book. It is your first book together, right?
Yes.
Correct.
That's
yeah.
awesome. Yes. And I guess in one quick closing comment, Mako, if I had another hour, I would interview the whole time about culture care, because that's in your current book. It's a subject of another book, as you stated, and it's really woven throughout your work. And it's so gratifying to me that you said that, because the way I look at it is that's the business that we're in.
That's right.
We as people, ODC, Open Discourse as an organization, that's the business that we're in. There's some deep brokenness, spiritual, yes, but also cultural division, all of those things. And our job is to care.
Let's do it. Second edition comes out this summer with forward by David Brooks. So
count me in. And he's at Yale now. He's doing what we're talking about, doing cultural care in higher education.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much for this delightful conversation. Can't wait to see you both in Lewisburg soon, and look forward to our continued work together. Thanks again for listening to the Open Discourse podcast. This podcast is brought to you through the generosity of the Shearer Group of Companies in State College, Pennsylvania. If you'd like to keep it going, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and consider making a donation at opendiscoursecoalition.org/donate. See you next week.